time we got started, more people will join us, I'm sure, in the next couple of minutes as well. But welcome to those of you who are here already. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending where you are in the world today. Very nice that you're all here and able to join us again. On behalf of the permanent missions of France and India to the Conference on Disarmament and the BWC Implementation Support Unit, we're pleased to welcome you to the second session of the online workshop on the establishment of an Article 7 database. Again, we appreciate all of those of you who are here after attending the first session last week as well. My name is Daniel Feeks. I'm the head of the Implementation Support Unit of the Biological Weapons Convention here in Geneva. The objective of today's workshop, the continuation of last week's workshop, is to provide an opportunity for states parties to exchange views on the database proposal and its further development. The first session of the workshop back on the 4th of May last week provided an overview of the database concept and the key issues for the further operationalization of the database. And this second session today is going to provide an opportunity to address such issues in more detail at the technical level. It will thereby complement the findings from an analysis of lessons learned from assistance databases utilized in relevant international organizations, which was conducted back in November last year. You'll recall the presentation last week by Fanny and then the interventions by experts from 3 relevant international organizations about their relevant databases. So to facilitate our discussions in this online setting today and to make efficient use of the limited time that we have available today, we've provided you already with an illustrative list of topics in advance. You should be able to see those on the screen as well. Kindly note that this information is provided based on results of the analysis of the lessons learned from the other databases and also as a way to facilitate our discussions. However, it's not intended to preclude discussions on any other topics that may be considered relevant by those of you participating today. As you can see from the slide on the screen, today's discussions are going to focus on 4 topics. First, the database objectives and functions. Secondly, the types and categories of assistance resources. Thirdly, users and access. And then finally, the database development and maintenance. We've also identified some overarching issues for the various topics that you may wish to keep in mind or comment on during the discussions, and you can see those also listed here on the slide as well. Those are the benefits of an Article 7 database for states parties, outstanding issues for database development and ways to address them, the way forward, including focus areas for further consideration, and the role and the implications of maintaining the database for the BWC Implementation Support Unit. So the way we're going to proceed today is that we have 2 co-moderators. You will recall our colleague from the ISU who presented the lessons learned study last week, Fanny Tonas-Panagua. And we are also fortunate to be joined by Dr. James Revel, who is the program lead in the WMD program at UNIDIR, the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. They will both serve as co-moderators for the discussions that will follow as well. Each moderator is going to present the topic using some PowerPoint slides for ease of reference and will invite participants to provide their input and comments on each slide. If you have comments or questions, you may raise your hand by using the icon at the bottom of the screen, should you wish to take the floor. Alternatively, you may also provide your input or your questions through the chat function in this WebEx platform as well. We're going to allocate roughly 20 minutes to each topic for discussion. So we encourage you to make use of the chat function if the time allocated isn't sufficient to address all the requests for the floor. But please do not feel constrained to share your views, as they're obviously very important to us. We've got some degree of flexibility and we can allocate more time to this meeting if needed. We obviously thank you in advance for your understanding and we'll do our best to address all comments and questions during this particular session of the workshop. So without any further ado, I would like to now hand the floor over to my colleague Fanny, who will take us through the next topic. So Fanny, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you. It is a great pleasure to co-moderate this session, and I look very much forward to a very interesting and fruitful discussion. We will start this discussion with the topic on objectives and functions of an Article 7 database. As you know, multilateral assistance frameworks rely largely on databases to improve or enable information sharing, collaboration, and coordination. So the objectives and functions of these databases depend on the underlying assistance framework and the specific elements of this framework that the database is intended to address. So the design of database features, the institutional implications for operation, the resource requirements needed for database development, the choice of the appropriate IT administration and user interface tools, all of these are aspects that will largely depend on the agreed database objectives. Therefore, having clarity on the objectives and respective functions of an Article 7 database is therefore a key issue and the first topic of our discussion today. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see the objectives and respective functions normally associated with the database frameworks supporting multilateral mechanisms for assistance in preparing and responding to an emergency situation. As you can see, these objectives and functions range from information exchange and awareness raising to preparedness, matchmaking, and response coordination. Some databases, such as WHO's Emergency Medical Teams database, seek to address one specific objective. In this case, the registry and readiness of such teams as an assistant resource to respond to medical emergencies. Other databases like OCHA's virtual on-site operations coordination center seek to address practically all of these objectives. Without any further comments, I would like now to open the floor for comments or questions. As I go through the list of functions, please feel free to raise your hand or provide your comments through the chat function. As you see, we have the awareness raising function as one of the possible objectives and functions of a database, and this is a function related to providing general information to the public on preparing and responding to events. So it's a way to contribute to public awareness on the subject. But for this specific function, states parties should have an understanding on the information that may be made publicly available. We will also discuss in the database on topic 3 related to users and access. We have also the resource. This objective, this function, is would allow to address one of the main challenges in assistance response mechanisms, namely the availability and readiness of assistance resources. The information exchange. With this objective, a database allows the states parties or stakeholders in the system to exchange relevant information and would also serve to support response coordination by making available the relevant information such as contact points and procedures. Another, can I check, Daniel, if can you hear me correctly?
Yeah, Fanny, I was just going to say, some people had just commented that your voice is kind of fading in and out sometimes. It actually seemed to be better just now when you were looking
Now,
to your right.
correct.
I don't know where your mic is, but yeah, if you can perhaps
Yes,
just speak in the direction
okay,
of the
all
mic,
right.
I think then it should
Yes,
be fine.
let
Sorry,
me,
Fanny, thanks.
yeah, yes. So I hope it's better now. Yes, so well, another important objective relates to preparedness and capacity building. So an assistance database may provide information on capacity building opportunities and enable matchmaking of requests and offers to enhance biopreparedness. In this case, for this function, it would be useful to have clarity about the relation of an Article 7 database with the existing Article 10 database. One option could be that any database functions will have functionalities allowing to enable cross-references and to avoid duplications. And finally, there we have the matchmaking function, pursuant to which an assistance database may provide a platform for submitting an event matching of assistance. As I mentioned, any such workflows normally reflect the underlying assistance framework, so procedures already agreed in the context of the multilateral assistance framework. Therefore, for this function, procedures for the submission of requests and offers of assistance in the framework of Article 7 should be in place. So with this brief introduction, I don't want to take a lot of time because we want to encourage all participants to provide their technical input, to provide their comments. And I will like now to open the floor for comments or for questions. And we will do our best to address all the comments. Do I see any requests for the floor at this stage? I see no requests for the floor. To give you a bit of time to go through the slides, we can. I wonder if we have the colleagues from the IAEA that registered, and it may be used to illustrate some of the functions if the colleagues from the IAEA or from the OPCW could perhaps, if they are in the meeting now, if they could give some overview of how these functions may be reflected in their respective frameworks.
Fanny, there's also now a question in the chat as well that I've just seen from Richard Guthrie.
I see. Yes, we have received a comment or question in the chat. And this, would there be value in the database to hold a small library of reference documents, such as national reports from Article 7 related exercises and lessons learned evaluations? All would have to be offered by the relevant authorities. This could be a useful resource to help frame both offers and requests for assistance. indeed, this is thank you very much. Thank you very much for that comment. That would appear to be a valuable source of information that would relate to the information exchange function, because it is one of the main objectives of this type of database structures, to provide a platform to exchange information. And reference documents such as national reports would have a value in this context. It would be able to help the states address the needs and how they could also design their offers or requests for assistance. So this is indeed it could be a source of information. And in other database frameworks, there are some this type of information, like national reports, may also be included as the type of information that can be provided through the database.
Fanny, I see that Dr. Basu is turned. I think, yeah, Dr. Basu wants to take the floor as well.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I hope I'm audible through this Darth Vader mask.
We can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, whichever parts of the world my colleagues are in. And thank you very much for this workshop. I would just like to add a comment to Fanny's remarks with reference to Richard's comment, that yes, this is the crux of information exchange interfacing, that crosstalk is very, very critical. And exercises that may not be directly even related to Article 7, because that's not yet happened. But we can definitely have national documents of different state parties which could be related to a similar profile that could be a documentation source to draw upon. Yes. Just a comment to add on to Fanny. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Batsu, for your comment. I see that we have a request from the floor from Sylvain. Sylvain, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fanny. So maybe just well, thank you all for this very interesting initiative from France and from India with this database that will be very beneficial, I think, for the convention. Just a remark with maybe for the floor, in order to help you to think about the design of this database. As you can see, as Fanny presented, this database is very comprehensive. It goes from awareness to information sharing to preparedness, so operational preparedness, and to matchmaking function with a very operational goal. So I just invite you as a remark to think on your side about a kind of functional analysis, which area you want to focus more. Because in some databases, you cannot have everything. So maybe you want that information sharing is a main point, awareness, communication, for example, or you want rather insist in matchmaking and really into the operational area. I guess, and I believe the database at the end will take into account all these features, but I think it's very important that you have this question with the resource rigid function. What do you want? What do you need? And for preparedness, what you want to see inside. So just some remarks, and I hope that the discussion will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. That is indeed a very, very important point. And that ties also with the discussion on the last topic that is related to database development and how there could be a progressive incorporation of different objectives and functions depending on the priorities or the understandings agreed by the states parties. I see that there is a comment, a question in the chat box, and it relates to the resources that would be covered within the resource registry function. So to give a practical example, this topic will be the second area that we will be discussing today. So it will follow this first topic, but let me just give you an example. Resource registry function. So in general, the resources to be registered will be any resources or capabilities that would be needed to respond to the use of a biological or toxic weapon. So we need to think about expertise that could be needed. So experts, medical experts or other experts. We also talk about field teams, response teams that would be ready to be deployed to respond to such an event. In some frameworks, information and procedures are also considered to be an assistance resource or capability. And in addition to that expertise, there is resources could also be in-kind contributions like medical equipment, material, vaccines, or in other frameworks, there is also the possibility to register financial contributions as assistance resources. I hope that that responds the questions for this question for now, and we will have a further discussion on that in the next topic where James will be moderating. I see no requests at this stage. No request floor. We are considering 20 minutes per topic.
Fanny, sorry, I see Dr. Basu, I think, would like to add something else as well.
Oh, please. Yes.
Thank you, Daniel. I just wanted to make a generic comment that the fact that all these 5 verticals, which are being shown on the slide, on the screen, these are kind of parallel verticals, which are cross-talking with each other and not a linear sequence. So for example, I think one of my colleagues, including Fanny, pointed out that the matchmaking function is equally important as the preparedness and capacity building, the resource registry, as well as awareness. So these are like 5 verticals which are cross-talking parallelly and moving at the same flow. That's going to be very, very important for this framework, or rather the blueprint. We have to also keep in mind that there's another very important component which will be absorbed somehow. I mean, this is exactly why a very broad-based dialogue and input technically is required from other colleagues, would be the fact that integrating and harmonizing the humanitarian and the logistic responses are also very critical. I mean, and that is being quite evident from the current crisis that's unfolding, that how fast can you bring the matchmaking into reality? How fast can the deliverables be delivered? And how fast can we actually see the mitigation measures kicking in, which could be quantifiable from multiple parametric views? And I think one of the points, like preparedness and capacity building function, which is very, very important part of the blueprint. And as Fanny said, that Article 10 and Article 7 are 2 very distinct articles. And the contents may have overlap and will also have unique features. So it's quite important that we do draw upon existing frameworks which are already in place of multiple international agencies. That way the clock is ticking and we don't lose a lot of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Basu, for those comments. Is indeed to see all these related objectives and functions as a whole and how they may correlate with each other, because even as I mentioned that in some cases some databases have only one specific feature. It doesn't mean that the underlying framework does not address all of these issues. They just do it through a different database structure or through different platforms. So it is indeed important to see how all these different functions correlate and how they are all important, and how, of course, to specify how far they can all be addressed in an Article 7 database. As mentioned as well, the registry of resources is really a key issue in such frameworks, because it is very difficult, if not impossible, to mobilize assistance in a short time in case of an emergency, unless these are already registered and these resources are ready to be deployed or provided on short notice. And similarly to that, the preparedness and capacity building function, it is what allows the states parties or the stakeholders in any such framework to make sure that they are ready at the national level and also ready at the international level. So for the coordination of the response at the international level. We have a request for the floor. Amanda, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good morning from the US, everyone. So I just wanted to see if it's possible to expand a little bit on the matchmaking function, because this is the one area that I'm kind of struggling to understand a little bit, is how a database can play that role. In the sense that if you've got a country that has experienced a deliberate attack that comes along and submits a request for assistance, maybe using the guidelines that have been proposed by South Africa separately under Article 7. I'm not quite sure then what the process is or how other databases have handled this matchmaking, because it seems like that's not something that can be done sort of technically. You need a person, a human, to come along and say, okay, we've got this request and we've got these resources that have been registered, and we can now match these two things together. So I can certainly see that a database would be useful in terms of understanding what assistance resources are available, but it seems as if that's not something that can be served just by the existence of a database itself. You would need an additional officer in the ISU or someone else who is actually serving that matchmaking function. But maybe there are ways of doing that technically without having to have a human present that I'm not aware of. So I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on what's envisioned for that. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that question, which is very pertinent. Indeed, there's always a person needed. It is even when there is a database structure, there is always the need for a facilitating role from an organization or from the users of the database structure. Here it is important to clarify that in some databases, in some of the databases that were analyzed, the matchmaking function is done in situ, not through the database. In some databases, there are workflows that serve to facilitate the matchmaking function. And these workflows will, of course, any procedure that would have been approved by the relevant organs or by the institution. So what the database can do is not replace or automatize fully the matchmaking function, but to incorporate functionalities or workflows that facilitate matchmaking. For instance, by having all resources registered, the database administrator, when receiving a request, depending on that request, will know and will assess to which of these providers of resources this request can be sent, so that they can decide whether they would offer the assistance or they have the available resources. So basically the database can serve to facilitate the matchmaking function, but not to substitute by the relevant organization or by the users themselves. I hope that responds the question. Is there any other comment on this? Yes.
Fanny, we have also two comments. A comment from Mr. Brückler, and also the suggestion from Ambassador Sharma, as I can see. As we have that many eminent experts here around, it would be great to hear perspectives, or in a kind of almost a kind of a wish list, what would be the preferences?
Thank you. I see. Yes, we have the comment from Ambassador Sharma that you have benefits, and I echo those remarks, as we have the benefit of the presence of such eminent experts from across the world. We look forward to hearing their views on the database, or the features or the wish list of what could be included in such a database. Then we have also another comment regarding the objectives and functions. So from the point of view of the writer, all objectives and functions mentioned on the slide would be preferred. The question is, what are the cost implications of additional or different functions, and whether there will be guidelines specifying how to feed information and in which format and detail, so that the matchmaking function can work properly. And it's and how it should be clear, of course, that what is asked for and what is offered. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Ambassador Sharma for his remarks, and thank you for this question from colleague from Austria. The will need to have guidelines on at least a general understanding on what can be offered, what type and categories of resources could be registered, and provide forms for submission and registration of resources. It has been highlighted by the different organizations that indeed this is a key aspect for ensuring matchmaking, and also for ensuring the readiness of resources. So the question here is how detailed the guidelines could be. Of course, the more detailed the guidelines, the easier is to do the matchmaking. But at the same time, there is a need to achieve a balance because if the guidelines are too detailed, then it becomes the users to register the resources. So there should be a balance in the level of detail of these guidelines that normally include information on the types and categories of resources, who is the contact point for the provision of resource, what a general description and forms with all the relevant information. I hope I responded the question, and I see we have another request from the floor. I have, let me, do you see Alex who requested?
Flerida Carino and Richard Guthrie.
Yes, let me first then give the floor to Flerida. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I just wondered first, a question. Has Article 7 ever been invoked by any of the parties to the BWC? Because that might help us in determining the objectives of the database. Because I'm new here, I'm new in this game. My question is, if I were, for example, if I were a minister of a country who thinks I have been attacked by somebody with biological weapons, my first question would be, what are the steps that I would need to do to actually, one, prove that I am being attacked, or at least demonstrate or have an idea that I'm being attacked? And then two, what are my resources for a rapid response? Third is, where do I get help for a more permanent solution to the possibility of an attack? And then the fourth probably will be, what do I need to mitigate any adverse effects of such an attack? And I think these are important components of a database. So I would think that information exchange along those lines would be very useful. The identification of where I can ask for help for rapid response preparedness, as well as immediate containment of the outbreak. And then which country would help me and what options do I have for a more permanent mitigation solution? And then perhaps one of the other functions that will be outside of this rapid response and capacity building would be awareness raising function, which may be actually the portion of the database that is open to the general public. I don't think the others that would be relevant to a rapid response and mitigation should be relevant to the public in general. Because if I were to actually do the attack, I would be ready to be able to provide countermeasures against these mitigation responses. So I think that's a practical approach I would take if I were a minister of a country that thinks it's being attacked. So I think that should be part of the database objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Flerida, for your comment, and allow me to ask Alex if you want to comment on the more Article 7 related questions raised by Flerida.
Just to be brief, Article 7 has not been invoked since the proposals made by Flerida, I think, are very valuable and could help to either prioritize or further shape our discussions. And we have in the other topics, I think, still some opportunity to further address them. I see Richard Guthrie has also taken the requested floor.
Thank you, Alex. For Richard, yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll just actually follow on from those last comments, because I think one of the things that has been a little bit missing from this discussion, and I apologize for missing your sessions last week, is that really we're looking at two timeframes here, as far as I see it. One is what was just discussed, the sort of response issues when somebody is either immediately being threatened or feels they have been attacked. But a major part of this for me is the preparedness, is the helping people have the resources in place so that their own national systems are more capable of dealing with the potential of a biological attack. And for that, I see two particular audiences. And I think we have to have these audiences in mind, because where people have talked about guidelines for the database, I think the audiences are really useful. The first is what I would call those with a lot of knowledge but few resources. So you can imagine individuals in countries where they've been tasked with this issue. Perhaps they've had a chance to follow it for 2 or 3 years. They've seen international discussions. They've been able to talk with colleagues in their own countries who may have some relevant knowledge, but they don't have the resources to do particular things like holding certain types of exercises or access to particular types of training for particular types of equipment. And so that's a really valuable audience we need to get to. And the things like offers for assistance can actually be quite specific, and there will be the technical knowledge in those that might make use of them to be able to interact with those. But I think the second really important audience is those with little knowledge and few resources. So it might be a desk officer who's just been posted into this subject. They've been informed by their government that this is something they need to be more prepared on. Or it might be somebody dealing with, say, BWC issues, and nobody in their government has thought about any preparedness to respond for attack. And so that individual is trying to push within their government that there ought to be response planning for an attack, for a potential attack. And some of the materials here, the sort of more awareness raising, will be extremely useful. Moreover, when I have engaged with mid-ranking officials from many countries, often the biggest obstacle to moving forward is a sense that the next task they have to do is too great for them to be able to do, that it's a big task, it's going to need lots of resources. And I think that audience of little knowledge, few resources can be really helped by something like a database, which provides examples of what's happened elsewhere, provides them confidence that if they move within their own governments to promote the ideas that they ought to be doing these types of activities, that there are external resources they can draw upon. And so in summary, I think having some sense of the audiences that could make use of the information within the database is therefore very useful for us to think about in terms of framing the database in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. These are very useful thoughts, and thank you for sharing them. On the users, indeed, just to take one of the several points, indeed important for such a database to make sure that the appropriate stakeholders and
Colleagues, it seems Fanny is disconnected at the moment. I wonder, Alex, with your indulgence, if I may proceed to topic 2, and perhaps when she comes back we can follow up. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. I just wanted to suggest.
Through the chat or at the end of the session. I think it is time to move for the second topic. Indeed, yes. So I thank you very much for the discussion, for all your comments, and then I pass over to James to host the second topic. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Fanny, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, colleagues, depending on where this finds you. So I'm going to move on to topic 2, and this is, I would say, it has been quite closely interconnected with the topic which Fanny was moderating on, but it takes perhaps a little bit of a different focus. So we are looking at the question of which types and categories of assistance resource capabilities may be registered, requested, and or offered in the context of an Article 7 database. To some extent, I think colleagues Sylvia and Renata and Florida have already touched upon this to some extent, but if we can move on to the next slide, I'll provide a very brief introduction and then perhaps I can get some responses from colleagues here. So as the slide indicates, there are a variety of types and categories of assistance that could be provided. To pick a couple of examples here on the issue of information, manuals, reference materials, procedures. We heard last week how some databases provide this sort of information type materials. The IAEA Unified System for Information Exchange in Incidents and Emergencies, for example, makes provision for information. Another option is to have capacity building. We heard from Anton on how the OPCW Article 10 database includes a capacity building function. Yet another opportunity is to include field teams. This would be rosters of teams who are ready to mobilize on short notice in order to provide assistance in responding to an event. Two possible examples here include the WHO emergency medical teams, which was discussed last week. One might also include the Russian Federation's proposal for mobile biolabs, which has also been raised in association with Article 7 in the past. Another area is financial contributions. States could potentially decide to establish a voluntary fund for assistance in responding to the use of a biological or toxin weapon. As I believe it was Ambassador Sharma pointed out last week, the OPCW model includes a voluntary fund, but this is perhaps one of those areas where states will need to provide guidelines, something Fanny has raised in the past, and there will need to be clarity over the sort of conditions for receiving and authorizing the use of contributions. It is fair to say that some of these types and categories of assistance will be easier than others to register and maintain in any database. Some of them would also clearly require some resource commitments, and some would need to be regularly updated. To echo a point made by Dr. Richard Guthrie earlier on, some of them may require different time frames as well. This is not to suggest that we should dampen the ambition for any database, but I think these are important points to consider in thinking through the types and categories of assistance resources that would be made available. With that, I'll open the floor. Please feel free to submit comments or questions or raise your hand. If I could really encourage you to do this, if I run out of steam, there is a very real risk that I may break into song, so it'd be infinitely preferable to have comments and questions from you for all concerned. Can't currently see anybody wanted to take the floor. Okay. Amanda, please. Amanda Moody, you want to take the floor? Please, Amanda, you have the floor.
Thanks, Jamie. So I have 3 comments here, and hopefully this can spark a little bit of discussion. So the first is sort of specific that when it comes to expertise, I'm not quite sure that the idea of rosters of experts is necessarily where we want to go. Well, let me say, first of all, I actually think that all of the resources that are listed on this slide could be really useful in including in the database. And I think that we can probably modify a couple of them. But I think that we could see our way clear to a database that could contain all of them, and that would definitely be really beneficial. But to get into some of the specifics, when it comes to sort of the roster of experts, at least in the US, and I assume that it's the same elsewhere, it can be really difficult to keep those things up to date. And I think that it could potentially be more time than countries are willing to commit to making sure that those rosters stay up to date, because experts move on to different jobs, their contact information changes, or they retire or move on to different positions. So maybe rather than thinking of it in terms of specific individuals who might have the expertise that would be useful for contributing. You know, the previous point on information mentions list of contact points. And so maybe we should be thinking of this in a more general sense of agencies or places that you'd want to reach out to in terms of the type of assistance that you're looking for. So, for example, if you want help with a law enforcement investigation of possible deliberate use, you know, here is the agency in the United States that you'd want to reach out to. It would be the FBI. Here's a contact number that is going to stay in use, no matter who happens to be in that position at the time. So thinking in terms of sort of general agency approaches rather than specific individuals might be helpful as we think about that. The second point that I wanted to make is specifically about field teams, but I think it gets into a more general issue. So we would need to decide if we really do want the database to deal just with deliberate use cases, or if we're thinking about assistance resources more generally. And the reason I mention this is not all field teams are necessarily going to be able to operate in a situation where there is a possibility that there's been deliberate use. There are certain teams where once that possibility is raised, their liability insurance is no longer going to cover them to operate within that scenario. And so we do sort of need to decide, do we want this database to be a broader sort of roster of all of these types of assistance that are available, which is fine, but then we'd probably want a way of filtering that down so that you can say, if you are looking at this and you are in a deliberate use situation, here are the resources that would be available to you that is a more select list. Or do we actually want this database to be only used in that type of situation, in which case the resources that states are able to offer is probably going to be a much shorter list. And then the third point that I wanted to make is just on the question of the voluntary fund. Again, I think that this is something that we're open to, something that could be really useful for states that maybe aren't willing to list out specific assets, but do want to contribute something that they can contribute financially. But there would be a lot of details that would need to be worked out about that, as far as who's responsible for administering the fund, how do you request access to the fund, what types of things can that potentially be used for. So, I think that's something that we're open to, but I think that that is going to need to be a pretty broad and comprehensive discussion if we want to make progress on that at the review conference. So just wanted to put a few thoughts out there on some of the specifics here. Thanks so much.
Many thanks, Amanda. I think there's some very useful points there, and sort of highlighting some of the logistical, the practical challenges, for example, in making sure the people on your database are operationally ready to go. I think those sort of things are important to think about as well. So thank you. I also see there seems to have gained some other colleagues have commented in the box here on points in the expert roster as well. So I think this is a useful discussion to pursue. I can't see anybody else with their hand up at the moment, but did anybody else wish to take the floor or make a comment, perhaps in response to Amanda, or on any other issue raised in terms of some of these, the different options here? Okay. Yeah, I mean, just
Silva.
Sorry.
Silva would like to take the floor.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thank you, James. Just a very echo to what Amanda said. I think we all, for the moment, we're very ambitious about this database, but I think we have to keep in mind that we really want something functional and useful. So really, I draw your attention and to focus on what is really feasible, achievable. And I really believe that it's not about the roster of experts, but only expertise, and we can keep that. I invite you also to think about how to optimize the different topics. Maybe in the information database, we can have outputs that will help to build the expertise. And within the expertise, we can have key informations that will help the capacity building. So I really think we have the different layers or topics here we can see in the screen. But I think at one moment we have to combine, to connect, and to interconnect them inside a project management with different, I would say, packages. So I think this is a very important, and this will help us to, as I said, to build a functional analysis. And to see what is achievable, what is wanted, but what is difficult to build. So this is just a comment on how efficient we have to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvain. I think that's useful, and perhaps I wouldn't want to dampen the idea of ambition too much, though, but I certainly take your point on the importance of focusing. I think that's useful. I understand, Pedro del Cerro, you wish to take the floor, sir? Please, if that's correct, and you are here, please, Pedro.
Yeah, thank you, James. Thanks the panelists, thanks the ISU, France and India for organizing this very important webinar. Was just taking the floor to react to the comments by our colleague Amanda Moody. The points that she raised, I believe they are very important. One, on the roster, on the potential roster, I believe that's up to the state parties of the BWC to decide if they are going to include institutions, their local law enforcement authorities or special labs, or individuals. The situation varies a lot depending on the country. So we are probably going to have, if at a certain point in the future, the review conference, we decide to establish this database, the roster will vary a lot. And Amanda also raised a very important issue. If we are going to deal with deliberate use of or natural outbreaks, I do not have an answer, but clearly this is one of the main topics, because the approach will need to be totally different. I can only wonder that a team that is sent to a specific location where there was a suspicious biological attack. This team organized by ISU or a possible task force will include different experts from the same team sent from the WHO. So it is something important that we need to take into consideration. It's an important issue for the discussion on the future. Also on the resources, I believe I don't need to repeat myself Brazil's position on this issue, specifically on the creation of another posts on the ISU. And by the way, we believe that ISU, they do the team that's there do a good job, but we believe that the creation of another post is either a cooperation expert of someone in charge of this database. It will depend on the negotiation on other issues. So we'll have to negotiate it during the RevCon. Thank you very much, and thanks again to the organizers of this meeting. Thanks, James. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pedro. I think that's a number of important points there. I think something you raised as well touches upon a comment which has been submitted by Florida, which concerns, I think the phrase here is, could some of these functions piggyback on the work of the WHO? And I think that's perhaps an important question to sort of explore a little bit further as well. I imagine Fanny may want to respond to that question, but we also have a request for the floor from Killian. So if I could hand the floor to you, Killian, then over to you, Fanny, if that's okay with everybody. Okay. Please, Killian, you have the floor.
Super. Thank you very much. Again, thank you very much for organizing this webinar. Very useful, very interesting. I just want to maybe just highlight a couple of things on our systems. Again, I apologize to everybody if you are familiar with the systems, but I think it's worth just maybe just dwelling on them for a moment. We have developed our systems to operationalize the obligations of member states and state parties to our conventions, the emergency conventions. So that includes the early notification convention and also then the assistance convention. So the UZ platform, it's been developed and it's been in place for over the last 20 years, and it's been added on and updated as we get experience and feedback from member states. So I think in terms of the system or the database that has been now being developed for yourselves for this cause, I think you should probably look at a base database initially, and then that it can be expanded as things are going along and as the needs be going into the future. I think for ourselves, you know, again, on the systems, specifically on the assistance side of things, member states, they can register the national assistance capabilities that they may be then in a position to offer to another member state in the case of a nuclear or radiological emergency. They can also register the resources that they may be also able to offer. It means then if I'm a member state and I decide I need to request assistance under the Assistance Convention, I can take a look at, first of all, and see, well, what capabilities are out there? What can I look at and what can I request assistance on? And I can also look at then the resources that may be offered by other member states too. For us, when it comes down to actually, when we receive a request for assistance on our database, it becomes a very, very fast process. I gave a demonstration of this the last day. It just means it becomes a very efficient process, and it saves a lot of time for us. I'm happy to take any questions after as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. I think that's really useful. I think that the point on the sort of evolution as end user requirements change is also perhaps something for states parties to keep in mind. I'm conscious, Fanny, did you want to respond to one of the points raised earlier? If not, I propose to wrap the session, but please, Fanny, please go ahead.
Just very briefly, James, thank you. Just very briefly to just recall that really one of the main guidelines for this database, and also based on lessons learned, is that really the database should not duplicate work from or available information or resources in the of other interpretations, and addressing the specific question of the role of the WHO. Indeed, for instance, in field teams, it is foreseen, and it would be the ideal situation that such field teams that already exist under other frameworks, as they may relate, of course, to an Article 7 response, that they would be registered in the database, or that they would be referenced in the database, and not that there would be, of course, a duplication of creating teams if there is already emergency teams at the WHO. Just to mention that, to clarify the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fanny. I think unless there is anybody else wishing to take the floor, and I can't currently see anybody or any messages from the chat function, what I would suggest is that we move to topic 3. I think if people do have points they'd like to raise, there's still plenty of time in which people can revisit this, and indeed I think it's a topic which will be revisited quite a lot in due course. But for now, if I can wrap up topic 2, and I'll hand back over to you, Fanny. Please, you have the floor. Your connection's not quite working, Fanny. Sorry.
All right, thank you. No, I apologize. I apologize. Thank you very much, James. I apologize. I think there were some issues with my connection before. I hope that it is better now. So thank you, James. And then we are moving to the third topic, which relates to users and access. So basically, who may or should be registered as users in an Article 7 database, and who should have access to the information. Findings from the study and discussions with colleagues from the other international organizations show that there are many possibilities. Some assistance databases are open only to users in participating states. Other databases are also open to users in international and non-governmental organizations. And when it comes to access, the access could be registered only to those users that are registered, or it could be partially or fully open to the public. So you have here a few options for registration of users. These are shown in the slide. So what could be the options? Well, for instance, users, of course, from government agencies, or other entities nominated through the official channels. There could also be organizations through designated contact points, or users users from NGOs if registered by designated contact points in states parties. So these are the possible options, and it is important to have a clear understanding on who may be registered as user, of course, before proceeding with the development of any database structure. An important factor here is to keep in mind the objective of any database. So the objective of assistance databases, and one of the main objectives, let's say, is to allow the relevant assistance providers to register their resources. So, of course, this is important to keep in mind, as these resources may come from international organizations as well, and in some cases, it's entities that are not government entities. And so, with this introduction, I would like to open the floor for comments. Do we see any requests for the floor? Not yet. I don't see any requests. I wonder if our colleague from the IEA, Kilian, if maybe if you wish to take the floor and explain how does it work at the IEA. I see that we have a request from the floor from Richard. Sorry, we have a request, so I will now pass first to Kilian and then to Richard. Thank you, Kilian. You have the floor.
Super. Thank you very much again. So again, as I mentioned, our systems and our databases that we are talking about here these are the operational tools we have to allow member states to fulfill their obligations under the various conventions we have. So in terms of who they are opened, the users that they're open to, they have to be nominated by the governments or else the permanent mission here in the Vienna to the IAEA. So they must nominate the people first of all to make the contact points. Once we have the actual organizations in each country designated and nominated, they can then specify various roles on our systems, and they can then set their own users within their own country, within their own organization. So they essentially are the administrator, the local administrator to the system. But before they can be made and allowed onto the system, we need to get an official designation from their government or the permanent mission. In terms of NGOs and members of the public, we don't open the systems to NGOs or members of the public. The reason for that is because, as I say, these are our operational tools. We can't afford to get our emergency channels clogged up by non-emergency contact points. As you can imagine, if there was a nuclear event in the morning, then and members of the public had these contact details, our systems would fail and we'd just be inundated. So we have to leave them and we have to keep them as clear as possible. So again, we have to be very careful about this. We also do, we do regular exercises on our various tools and our various, systems. One of them that we also do on a regular basis is to check the contact details for the users to make sure that the information we have remains valid, that they're still there, that the contact point details are up to date. So first of all, they're encouraged to make sure that they update their details, but we also do a test by sending them an email or a fax or a telephone calls just to make sure that everything is working correctly. And that's the summary of that one.
Thank you very much, Kilian. That's very useful. That's to see the experience, how the IAEA assistance database is implemented, and the practical aspects also. of managing the accounts and the registration of users. I pass now the floor to Richard. Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much for letting me take the floor again. Yeah, I'd like to come back to users. I think one of the challenges, having, from my experience with interaction with a number of governments, is that quite often people within governments, because they're large organizations, don't always necessarily know who else within their government is dealing with relevant issues. And one of my fears for a database like this is that a limitation ends up happening because the main point of contact is essentially the Geneva mission, or perhaps the desk officer back in capital. And those people aren't necessarily aware of, there might be an agency dealing with health protection with an individual who could actually benefit from the knowledge that is contained within the database. So I think in defining the users, I think information should be provided to permanent missions, to desk officers back in capital, about the nature of people that could benefit from the database. Now, obviously, it has to be a national decision made through appropriate national channels as to who is given a government registration for the database. But I think we need to actively think about how, as a community, we can then promote the ideas that there has to be a wide access so that, say, a mission from, my favorite country when I'm hypothesizing on things is the country somewhere. So the permanent mission of somewhere in Geneva should then be encouraged to think about which are the appropriate agencies and individuals within those agencies who might benefit from the information on Article 7 database. Because, to summarize the point, the database will not have value if it's only, say, people from the permanent mission who are looking at it. It needs people with some knowledge and with particular assignments to deal with these issues that will get the most benefit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. You have many valid points, and this is an aspect that is very important and is also something that could be addressed in the guidelines on what are the categories of experts, of officials in the countries that should or may be, or it would be beneficial to register as users of the database. I know that in some of the database, in some organizations, it is also possible, and this is what some of them do, that they have different categories of users, and each category of user has different rights. So this is to be considered when examining the possible users of an Article 7 database. Are there any other requests for the floor at this stage? I don't see any. So allow me then to go to the next slide.
Fanny, if I may interrupt, I think we have a request from Brazil to take the floor.
Yes, Brazil, you have the floor. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor again. Just want to react on this, in fact, on this slide and this proposal. Well, this is just a webinar. We, at a certain point in the future, will have to discuss this proposal through the in the regular venue. But I just want to highlight that I don't see how NGOs could be even if nominated by their governments, could have access to this database. We just heard our colleague from the IAEA say that only member states have access to the database. We know there's a sensitive issue. It become even more sensitive after the pandemic. So we should be very strict in the way who and how is going to access this potential database. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for that comment. We have any for the floor? I don't see. So Alex, no. So all right. So let's then go to the next slide. Here is the question of access. Who should have access to the information reflected in an Article 7 database? Here, this is also related to the awareness raising function or possible awareness raising function of an Article 7 database, where there could be some of the information included in the database that could be made available to the public. Here on the slide, what is reflected is the approach that has been agreed for the existing Article 10 database. And for this database, registered resources are publicly available. So the resources that are registered in the database are publicly available. They relate to capacity building, expertise, equipment. These are publicly available. And the specific, more specific information, so specific requests and offers of assistance are limited to users. So this is just how it works, how it has been agreed for Article 10 database, and it is something that it is important to consider and to have agreement on if there will be part of the information that would be available to the general public. And with this brief introduction, I would like to open the floor for comments or remarks on access to information in an Article 7 database. I see no requests. No requests for the floor at this stage. This question is, of course, closely related to the extent of information that will be included in the database, and it's to be linked, of course, to the type of information that would be reflected. I see that Richard has asked for the floor. Richard, over to
you. I apologize for taking the floor again. But since there's a sort of gap, I think this who would have question, I want to raise the issue of NGOs, as our colleague from Brazil had just mentioned. And I think it all depends on what is the form of information and what is it that the NGO or the individual, probably from an NGO, could have. So I can imagine certain NGOs, especially those who deal with international disaster relief, who may be able to give capacity building training, perhaps with the supports of the governments in the country that they are based, but perhaps with support from others. And that wouldn't necessarily mean that somebody from that NGO who was offering assistance would necessarily then have access to every piece of information in the data set. And so I think we need to work out what is appropriate at particular points. Certainly in my experience of reading of the literature about disaster relief, there are a number of training courses put on by a number of organizations. And when I have tried to approach some of those to say, have you ever taken into account when you're doing training for public health workers about dealing with an outbreak of disease, whether you ever include thoughts of a deliberate disease, and the couple of conversations I've had a chance to have with people indicates they haven't really thought that one through. And I think we might want to encourage them to add in some part of their training for that, at which point notification of that sort of training would be a valuable contribution within an Article 7 database. And so we'd want to work out a way that such an offer from reputable organizations could be included. Now, that it could be that it's best for the state to do it and to include contact details for the NGO, or it could be better for the NGO to be able to update with, say, course dates and training opportunities. But just because an entity can contribute, say, material about an offer, doesn't mean that that entity also has all the information about, say, requests or other details that are on the database. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. I see that Pedro from Brazil has asked for the floor. Over to you, Pedro.
Thank you. Thank you. I just need to react to that because this is a very important point. Colleagues that follow BWC know our position on this issue. 2 years ago, before the pandemics, I believe it was 2019 or 2018, we had a specific discussion on this. And at that time, I myself reminded that the only good definition that I know about these organizations are in the WHO. WHO, they have the FENSA, Framework of Engagement with Non-State Actors. And non-state actors comply private sector, corporate foundations, academia, and NGOs. So it's very specific, it's clear, it was agreed by all member states of WHO. And the BWC, we do not have this definition. What I see in many of the BWC meetings is a list of supposedly NGOs, and when I read, most of them are academia. They are universities, they are not NGOs. NGOs are member-driven organizations, and they have very specific goals. These universities, they have a very good work. They have a very important contribution to the debate, but it doesn't mean, but they are not non-governmental organizations. Also, there are some NGOs, and I can think about some of them that are quasi-para. When I report back to my capital, I say this para-estatal. I don't know if that's the right word in English, but they are not state and they are not NGOs. They are a hybrid, but they call themselves NGOs. Well, I'm sorry, they are not NGOs. So either we have a very clear definition of NGOs, not only for this database, but for other areas of BWC, or I go back to my point that will be very dangerous to open access to this information or anything else for NGOs on this very sensitive topic. Thank you. Sorry if I took that much time, my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for those remarks, which will be very useful in the context of the discussions that states parties will need to have on this important topic. I don't see further requests for the floor at this stage. Again, we have some questions, and again, I apologize, but we will respond to this later. I would like to pass then to Jamie for the fourth topic, and I thank you all very much for for the interesting discussion. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Fanny, and thank you, colleagues. I'll turn to the topic 4 now, which deals with database development and maintenance. I'm conscious of the time, but hopefully with Alex and Daniel and your indulgence, we can go a little bit over, but I will try and keep it brief. As the slide here it indicates, that there are several features which could be progressively considered as part of a phased approach to developing an Article 7 database. I think it's important to caveat this by saying that any database is likely to require tweaks, developments, fixes, and will evolve. But as Bruce remarked last week, it seems important to at least to determine the priorities in the initial phase of any database development. So in the remaining time, I really would move straight into opening the floor to get states parties' views, to get stakeholders' views on what really should be prioritized. And also, with your indulgence, if I may tie this into the second question under this topic, which deals with resource implications for the ISUs. There's a point Pedro Docero from Brazil touched upon already, and I think others may have views on this. But just quickly on this point, the ISU consists of 3 full-time staff, and I think it's fair to say they have been stretched in the past. Moreover, there is not necessarily in-house IT capacity for any database development, so there could be resource implications there. So I'll put both those questions out and join them if that's okay with colleagues, because I think we are running out short of time. So if I can open the floor, and anybody who wishes to take up any of those points related to prioritization of features or resource issues, I think it'd be useful to get your views on either of those topics now. Amber Moat, please. Amber, you have the floor. Amber, are you?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please proceed.
Oh, thank you very much, Jamie, and good afternoon from the UK. I just had a very brief comment. I know time is very short now, on potentially what we could be doing in the future. So first of all, thank you to India, France, and the ISU for bringing us together to talk about this topic. We think it's very important to maintain momentum on this topic. So we might want to think about a potential next step. And I'm sure, well, the UK and I'm sure many other states parties are probably thinking about things that they would like to see in the database, or what they could potentially offer. So perhaps not too specific at this stage, more illustrative of what could be offered. But perhaps there is merit in an exercise to gather information from states parties on things like materials or agencies, training resources, laboratory services, or other in-kind contributions that states parties could actually offer to the database. Then potentially seeing what the states parties can provide to support the Article 7 initiative. This may help to further the decision making about what could be included in the database going forward. So I know this comment probably does jump back to topic number 2, but I just wanted to raise that before we run out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amber, for the comments. So the idea of an information gathering exercise, certainly something for states parties to consider further. Does anybody else wish to take the floor on this, on either the point, or if I may have the next slide, please, Wenji, on issues related to the ISU and resources as well? I think it's the next one. Please do feel free to chip in if anybody does have any thoughts on this. Can't currently see anybody at the moment. Yeah, I think this probably is something that's that delegations here will need to give some thought to, and that the second sort of set of questions around ISU resources, I think it was pointed out in the OPCW presentation last week that they have one staff member that is permanently assigned to the database, and that they also need a program support and how to get somebody in to help the design of the database. That strikes me as something which will be important for states parties to consider moving forward. particularly that lack of dedicated IT support that would be capable of setting this up. Any other comments? I still can't see anybody on my list here. Alex, am I missing anybody? Could you let me know if I am?
No.
Okay. If that is the case, then and nobody has any further comments, I think there'll be plenty of time for further discussion on this, and I'm sure ISU colleagues would welcome further inputs in writing should there be interest in doing so. So I don't think this is an end to the discussion, but for now I will hand over to Daniel to provide some closing remarks. So Daniel, if I may hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Jamie, and thanks to you, to Fanny, and for everyone for the active participation in the workshop as well. It's been great listening to all the different comments and views as well. So yeah, thank you very much to everyone for participating. I hope that this event has helped to consolidate the technical input on possible elements for the operationalization of the Article 7 database that will be useful for states parties when considering this topic further. We will be preparing a summary of the discussions held during this session and the first session that took place last week, and we'll provide that summary during the briefing session that is currently planned for the 2nd of June, so in a few weeks' time, and which will also give another opportunity for a kind of a broader discussion on the way forwards as well. So thanks again. Thanks for your interest in joining today's discussion and for all of the valuable input that you've provided. Of course, as Jamie just said as well, if anyone does have additional comments or maybe more detailed comments than they had time to provide online today, then you can still do so and provide any comments and feedback to the implementation support unit via our email address, which is bwc@un.org. And then finally, all of the information about today's meeting, including the recording of the meeting itself, will be made available on the internet on the ODA Meetings Place website in the coming days. So let me just check one more time. We have no additional requests for the floor. Alex, you don't see any? Nope. Okay. So you see on the screen there our email address, so your feedback on the workshop itself, your additional feedback and comments on the actual substance of the workshop also would be much appreciated as well. But once again, let me thank you all for your participation today, for spending time with us, and wish you all a very good day. Thanks again for your participation, and goodbye.